Sarah Chun walked into the music room at Westfield High School like she did every morning. She kept her head down and walked to her usual seat in the back corner. The room was full of other students talking loudly about their weekend plans. Sarah sat down quietly and took out her notebook. She always sat in the same spot because nobody noticed her there. Sarah was 17 years old and had been at this school for 2 years. She came to America from Taiwan when she was 14. Her family moved here because her father got a job at a big company. Sarah could speak English very well, but she still felt different from the other students. She was shorter than most girls in her class and had long black hair that she always kept in a simple ponytail. Every morning, Sarah would sit in the back of the music room and listen to the other students talk. They would laugh about parties and complain about homework. Sarah never joined their conversations. She would just sit there and draw small pictures in her notebook while waiting for class to start. Mrs. Henderson was the music teacher. She was a tall woman with gray hair who always wore long skirts and comfortable shoes. She had been teaching at the school for 15 years. Mrs. Henderson knew all the students who were good at music. She knew who could sing well and who played instruments. But she barely noticed Sarah Chun. When Mrs. Henderson looked at Sarah, she saw a quiet girl who never spoke up in class. Sarah never raised her hand to answer questions. She never volunteered to sing solos or play instruments in front of the class. Mrs. Henderson thought Sarah was just another student who was taking music class because she had to, not because she wanted to. Sarah's desk was next to the window. She would often look outside during class and watch the trees move in the wind. Sometimes she would see birds flying and wonder what it would be like to be so free. The music room had several old pianos along the walls. Sarah would look at them sometimes, but she never went near them when other students were around. The other students in the class were very different from Sarah. There was Jessica, who loved to sing and always tried to get the best parts in school shows. There was Marcus, who played guitar and was always showing off his skills. There was Amanda, who played violin and talked about wanting to go to music school after high school. These students were confident and loud. They would argue with Mrs. Henderson about which songs to play. They would complain when she gave them homework. They acted like they owned the music room. Sarah watched them but never tried to join in. She felt like she was watching a movie about other people's lives. During lunch breaks, Sarah would sometimes stay in the music room. She would sit at her desk and eat her sandwich while the room was empty. She liked the quiet. Sometimes she would hear other students practicing in the rooms next door, but she never practiced anything herself. At least that was what everyone thought. Sarah's family lived in a small apartment about 20 minutes from school. Her mother worked at a hospital as a nurse. Her father worked long hours at his office job. Sarah had a younger brother named David who was good at math and wanted to be an engineer. Her family was proud of David because he got good grades and had many friends at school. Sarah's parents often asked her why she was so quiet. They wanted her to make more friends and join school activities. They worried that she was not happy in America. Sarah would always tell them that she was fine and that she liked school. She did not want them to worry about her. What Sarah's parents did not know was that their daughter had a secret. What Mrs. Henderson did not know was that Sarah had been playing piano since she was 4 years old. What the other students did not know was that Sarah could play music better than any of them. Sarah learned to play piano from her grandmother in Taiwan. Her grandmother's name was Mei Lin, and she had been a famous piano player many years ago. Before Sarah's family moved to America, Sarah spent every day after school at her grandmother's house. The old woman would sit next to Sarah at her beautiful black piano and teach her to play. Grandmother Mei Lin had gentle hands and a soft voice. She would show Sarah how to hold her fingers and how to press the keys. She taught Sarah to read music and to understand how different notes work together. Sarah loved these lessons more than anything else in the world. Sarah's grandmother told her stories about playing piano in big concert halls when she was young. She told Sarah about the feeling of making beautiful music for hundreds of people. She said that music was like a language that everyone could understand. No matter where they came from or what language they spoke, when Sarah's family decided to move to America, Sarah was very sad to leave her grandmother on her last day in Taiwan. Her grandmother gave her a small jade bracelet. She told Sarah to wear it whenever she played piano, so that she would always remember their lessons together. Sarah kept the jade bracelet in her backpack every day at school. Sometimes she would touch it during music class and remember her grandmother's voice. She would remember the feeling of playing beautiful music and the way her grandmother would smile when Sarah learned a new song, but Sarah was afraid to let anyone know about her piano skills. She was afraid that if people knew she was different, they would treat her differently. She had seen how the other students looked at kids who were too smart or too talented. She did not want that kind of attention. Sarah also missed her grandmother every day. Playing piano reminded her of home and made her feel sad. It was easier to pretend that she did not know how to play. It was easier to be invisible and quiet than to show people who she really was. So every day, Sarah would sit in the back of the music room and pretend to be just another student. She would listen to the other students talk about music and make mistakes when they played their instruments. She would watch Mrs. Henderson teach basic music lessons that Sarah had learned years ago. Sarah thought that if she stayed quiet and invisible, she would be safe. She thought that if nobody noticed her, she would not have to worry about fitting in or being different. But sometimes, late at night in her room, Sarah would dream about playing piano again. She would dream about the feeling of her fingers moving across the keys and the sound of beautiful music filling the air. Sarah did not know that very soon everything would change. She did not know that her secret would be discovered. She did not know that being invisible was about to become impossible. Mrs. Henderson stood at the front of the music room with a tired look on her face. It was Monday morning, and she had spent the weekend grading papers and planning lessons. She looked at her class of 25 students and felt frustrated. Most of them seemed bored and uninterested in music. She had been teaching for 15 years, and some years were harder than others. This was one of the hard years. The spring music recital was coming up in 2 months. Every student in the music program had to perform a solo piece. Mrs. Henderson had been putting off assigning the pieces because she knew it would cause problems. Some students would complain that their pieces were too hard. Others would complain that their pieces were too easy. She was tired of dealing with complaints. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat loudly to get the students' attention. Jessica and Marcus stopped talking about their weekend plans. Amanda put down her phone. Sarah looked up from her notebook where she had been drawing a small flower. "Listen up, everyone," Mrs. Henderson said in a serious voice. "I need to talk to you about the spring recital. As you know, this is a requirement for passing this class. Each of you will perform a solo piece on stage in front of your families and friends." Several students started to groan and complain. Mrs. Henderson held up her hand to make them stop. "I don't want to hear any complaints. This is not optional. I will assign each of you a piece based on your skill level and instrument." Jessica raised her hand quickly. "Mrs. Henderson, can I pick my own song? I have been practicing this really cool pop song, and I think it would be perfect for the recital." "No, Jessica, I will choose the pieces. I know what is appropriate for a school recital." Mrs. Henderson's voice was getting sharper. She was already annoyed, and the day had just started. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "This is stupid." "Why? Do we have to do this?" "Nobody wants to listen to us play boring classical music. Because it's part of the curriculum, Marcus. If you don't like it, you can drop the class." Mrs. Henderson was losing her patience. She had dealt with this same attitude every year, and she was tired of it. Sarah sat quietly in her corner and listened to the other students complain. She felt nervous about the recital, but not for the same reasons as the other students. She was nervous because she would have to perform in front of people, and she had been trying to stay invisible for so long. Mrs. Henderson opened her grade book and started calling out names. "Jessica, you will be singing Ave Maria by Schubert. Marcus, you will play Greensleeves on guitar. Amanda, you will play Bach's Minuet in G on violin." Each student reacted differently to their assignment. Jessica looked excited because she loved to sing classical music. Marcus rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath. Amanda nodded and wrote down the name of her piece. Mrs. Henderson continued down her list. She assigned pieces to students based on what she thought they could handle. She gave easier pieces to students who were not very skilled. She gave slightly harder pieces to students who had been playing for a few years. Sarah's name was near the end of the list. She sat in her corner and waited nervously. She hoped that Mrs. Henderson would give her something simple and easy. She wanted a piece that would not draw attention to her performance. "Sarah Shun," Mrs. Henderson called out. She looked at Sarah briefly, then back at her book. "You will be playing Chopin's Etude Op. 10 No. 4 in C-sharp minor on piano." The room became very quiet. Even the students who had been whispering stopped talking. Sarah felt her heart start to beat faster. She knew this piece very well. Her grandmother had taught it to her when she was 12 years old. But she also knew that it was one of the most difficult piano pieces ever written. Jessica turned around in her seat to look at Sarah. "Wow, that sounds really hard." "I've never even heard of it." Amanda whispered to the girl next to her, "My violin." "Teacher says that Chopin etudes are some of the hardest pieces in classical music. Why would Mrs. Henderson give that to Sarah?" Marcus laughed quietly. "She's probably trying to torture her. That's what she does to students she doesn't like." Sarah felt her face getting red. She wanted to disappear completely. She looked down at her notebook and pretended to write something important. But inside, she was feeling many different emotions. At the same time, Mrs. Henderson did not seem to notice that the other students were talking about Sarah's assignment. She was tired and just wanted to finish giving out the pieces so she could move on to other things. She looked at Sarah and saw a quiet girl who never caused trouble. She thought that giving Sarah a challenging piece might motivate her to work harder in class. "Mrs. Henderson," Sarah said quietly, raising her hand just a little bit, "could I maybe get a different piece? Something easier?" Mrs. Henderson looked at Sarah with surprise. Sarah almost never spoke in class, so hearing her voice was unusual. "Why would you want an easier piece, Sarah?" "This will be good for you. It will push you to improve your skills." Sarah felt all the other students looking at her. She felt like she was under a bright spotlight. I don't think I can play something that difficult." "Nonsense," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "You've been in this class for 2 years. It's time for you to challenge yourself. I believe you can do it if you practice hard enough." Sarah wanted to argue, but she knew it would only make things worse. She nodded quietly and wrote down the name of the piece in her notebook. Her hands were shaking a little bit as she wrote. After class, several students came up to Sarah. They all seemed worried about her. "Sarah, that piece sounds really hard," said a girl named Lisa. "My older sister took piano lessons for 10 years, and she said Chopin etudes are for advanced students only." "You should ask Mrs. Henderson to change it," suggested another student. "It's not fair for her to give you something so difficult." Sarah appreciated that her classmates were trying to help her, but she just wanted to get away from everyone. She put her books in her backpack and headed for the door. "Thanks for worrying about me," she said quietly. "I'll figure it out." Sarah walked to her next class, but she could not concentrate on anything the teacher was saying. She kept thinking about the piece that Mrs. Henderson had assigned her. She remembered learning it with her grandmother 3 years ago. She remembered how excited her grandmother had been when Sarah finally mastered all the difficult passages. The Chopin Etude Op. 10 No. 4 was known as one of the most technically challenging pieces in the piano repertoire. It required the pianist to play very fast notes with perfect accuracy. The left hand had to play rapid arpeggios while the right hand played a complex melody. Most piano students needed years of advanced training before they could even attempt it. Sarah knew that she could play this piece perfectly. She had performed it several times in Taiwan, and her grandmother had always been proud of her skill. But nobody at school knew about her musical background. They all thought she was just a quiet girl who was not particularly good at anything. During lunch, Sarah sat alone at a table in the cafeteria. She ate her sandwich and thought about what she should do. She could tell Mrs. Henderson the truth about her piano skills, but that would mean revealing her secret. She could pretend to struggle, with the peace and hope that Mrs. Henderson would change her mind. Or she could try to play it badly on purpose so that nobody would know how skilled she really was. Sarah touched the jade bracelet in her backpack and thought about her grandmother. She wondered what her grandmother would want her to do. She remembered her grandmother's words about music being a language that everyone could understand, but Sarah was still afraid. She was afraid of being different. She was afraid of standing out. She was afraid that if people knew she was talented, they would expect things from her that she was not ready to give. Sarah finished her lunch and decided that she would try to play the piece badly. She would make it look like she was struggling, so that Mrs. Henderson would think she had made a mistake. It seemed like the safest plan. Sarah did not know that this decision would make everything much more complicated. She did not know that trying to hide her talent would be harder than she thought. She did not know that Mrs. Henderson was smarter than she realized. Sarah spent the next 2 weeks trying to look like she was struggling with the Chopin piece. Every day during lunch, she would go to the music room and sit at one of the old pianos. She would open her sheet music and pretend to have trouble reading the notes. When other students walked by, she would play wrong notes on purpose and make frustrated faces. It was much harder than Sarah had expected. Her fingers knew exactly where to go on the keys. Her muscle memory was so strong that she had to fight against it constantly. She had to think about playing badly, which was the opposite of everything her grandmother had taught her. Sarah's friend Maya started eating lunch with her in the music room. Maya was a nice girl who was worried about Sarah's assignment. She had never heard of the Chopin piece, but she could tell that Sarah was having a hard time with it. "This sounds really complicated," Maya said one day as Sarah stumbled through a difficult passage. "Maybe you should ask Mrs. Henderson for help." Sarah shook her head and hit another wrong note on purpose. "I think I can figure it out. I just need more practice." Maya listened to Sarah play for a few more minutes. The music sounded choppy and unclear. Sarah's fingers seemed to get stuck on the fast parts, and she would stop frequently to look at the sheet music. "You know what?" Maya said, "My cousin took piano lessons for a long time. Maybe she could help you with some of the harder parts." "No. That's okay," Sarah said quickly. "I don't want to bother anyone." Maya could see that Sarah was getting frustrated. "Are you sure? You look really stressed about this." "Maybe Mrs. Henderson would let you switch to an easier piece if you explained how hard this one is." Sarah had thought about this many times, but she was afraid to ask. She was afraid that if she talked to Mrs. Henderson too much, the teacher might start paying more attention to her. "I'll be fine. The recital isn't for another month and a half." Other students started to notice Sarah's practice sessions. Sometimes a small group would gather outside the music room door and listen to her play. They would whisper to each other about how difficult the piece sounded and how Sarah seemed to be struggling with it. "I feel bad for her," Sarah heard one girl say. "Mrs. Henderson is being really unfair." "Yeah, why would she give the hardest piece to someone who's not even good at piano?" Another student replied. Sarah felt guilty when she heard these conversations. The other students were being kind and supportive, but they were worried about her for no reason. She was lying to everyone, including her friends. Mrs. Henderson also started to notice Sarah's practice sessions. She would walk by the music room during lunch and hear Sarah playing. The music sounded rough and incomplete, which was exactly what Mrs. Henderson expected from a student who was learning a difficult piece. But sometimes Mrs. Henderson noticed things that seemed strange. Sarah's hand position was often perfect, even when she was playing wrong notes. Her timing was usually correct, even when she hit the wrong keys. These were small details that most people would not notice. But Mrs. Henderson had been teaching music for many years. One day, Mrs. Henderson stopped outside the music room door and listened more carefully. Sarah was playing a particularly difficult section of the piece. She was making several mistakes, but the underlying rhythm was exactly right. Mrs. Henderson frowned and made a mental note to pay closer attention to Sarah's progress. Sarah was also having a hard time emotionally. She missed playing music the way she used to. She missed the feeling of her fingers moving smoothly across the keys. She missed the joy of making beautiful sounds. Playing badly on purpose was making her feel sad and frustrated. At home, Sarah's family started to notice changes in her behavior. She was more quiet than usual, and she seemed worried about something. Her mother asked her several times if everything was okay at school. "I'm fine, Mom," Sarah would say. "Just tired from studying." Sarah's father noticed that she seemed tense during dinner. "Is school going well? Are your teachers treating you fairly?" Sarah nodded and focused on her food. She did not want to tell her parents about the recital because she knew they would ask too many questions. They might want to come watch her perform, and that would make everything more complicated. David, Sarah's younger brother, was usually very talkative at dinner. But even he noticed that Sarah seemed different. One night he asked her directly, "Are you okay? You seem sad lately." Sarah looked at her brother and felt like crying. She wanted to tell someone the truth, but she was afraid of what would happen. "I'm just working on a difficult school project. It's stressing me out." Sarah's parents exchanged worried looks. They had been hoping that Sarah would become more confident and outgoing in America. Instead, she seemed to be getting more withdrawn and quiet. At school, Sarah's practice sessions continued to draw attention. More students started to stop by the music room to listen. Some of them offered to help her with different parts of the piece. Others just wanted to hear what the famous difficult piece sounded like. Jessica, who was working on her own recital piece, started practicing in the music room at the same time as Sarah. She was curious about the Chopin piece and wanted to hear it played correctly. "Have you ever heard this piece performed by a real pianist?" Jessica asked Sarah one day. Sarah nodded. "I've heard recordings of it online. It's supposed to be really beautiful when it's played right," Jessica said. "I watched a video of a famous pianist playing it, and it sounded amazing." Sarah felt a pang of sadness. She remembered exactly how beautiful the piece could sound. She had played it beautifully many times in Taiwan. But now she was deliberately making it sound ugly and wrong. "Yeah, it's probably nice when someone good plays it," Sarah said quietly. Jessica noticed that Sarah looked upset. "Hey, don't worry about it. I'm sure you'll get it eventually. These things take time." Amanda also started spending time in the music room during lunch. She was working on her violin piece and wanted company while she practiced. She listened to Sarah play and felt sorry for her. "This piece is really unfair," Amanda said one day. "I looked it up online, and it's supposed to be for advanced college students or professional pianists. I don't understand why Mrs. Henderson gave it to you." Sarah felt more guilty every time someone said something like this. Maybe she thinks I need to be challenged. "Well, you're definitely being challenged," Amanda said. "I've never heard anything so difficult in my life." Marcus also heard Sarah practicing and had his own opinions. "Mrs. Henderson is crazy," he told his friends. "She's setting Sarah up to fail. That piece is impossible." These conversations made Sarah feel worse and worse. She was starting to realize that her plan to play badly was causing problems she had not expected. People were feeling sorry for her, and they were getting angry at Mrs. Henderson. Sarah did not want to cause trouble between her teacher and her classmates, but Sarah was also starting to miss playing music correctly. Every time she forced herself to play a wrong note, she felt like she was betraying her grandmother's memory. Her grandmother had spent years teaching her to play beautifully, and now Sarah was deliberately playing ugly music. Late at night, Sarah would lie in bed and think about her grandmother. She would remember the warm afternoons they spent together at the piano. She would remember her grandmother's patient voice explaining how to make each note sound perfect. She would remember the pride in her grandmother's eyes when Sarah learned a new piece. Sarah started to wonder if she was making the right choice. Maybe it would be better to tell the truth about her piano skills. Maybe people would be happy to discover that she was talented instead of angry that she had been hiding it. But Sarah was still afraid. She was afraid of being different. She was afraid of disappointing people if she could not live up to their expectations. She was afraid that if she stood out, she would not be able to hide anymore. Sarah did not know that Mrs. Henderson was starting to suspect something. She did not know that her careful plan to play badly was not working as well as she thought. She did not know that very soon, she would have to make a choice between continuing to hide and finally showing everyone who she really was. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and Sarah was alone in the music room practicing for her recital. She had been working on the same difficult passage for 20 minutes, deliberately making the same mistakes over and over again. Her fingers were starting to hurt from playing incorrectly, and she was feeling frustrated with herself. Sarah looked around the empty room to make sure no one was watching. The hallway outside was quiet, and she could hear the distant sound of students in other classrooms. She felt safe and alone, which was exactly what she needed. For just a moment, Sarah decided to play the passage correctly. She wanted to remember what it felt like to make beautiful music. She positioned her hands properly on the keys and let her fingers move the way they naturally wanted to move. The music that came out of the piano was completely different from what Sarah had been playing for the past 2 weeks. Her fingers moved smoothly and quickly across the keys. Each note was clear and precise. The melody sang out beautifully, just like her grandmother had taught her. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself enjoy the feeling. This was who she really was. This was the skill she had been hiding from everyone. For 30 seconds she allowed herself to play the way she truly could, but then Sarah heard footsteps in the hallway. She quickly changed back to playing wrong notes and made her hands look clumsy again. She did not want anyone to catch her playing well. The footsteps passed by the music room without stopping. Sarah felt relieved, but also disappointed. She had enjoyed those few moments of real music more than she had expected. Sarah tried to go back to practicing badly, but something had changed. Now that she had remembered what it felt like to play correctly, it was even harder to play wrong. Notes on purpose. Her fingers kept wanting to go to the right places. Her muscle memory was fighting against her attempts to make mistakes. Sarah was concentrating so hard on playing badly that she did not notice Mrs. Henderson standing in the doorway. The teacher had been walking by and heard the music coming from the room. She had stopped to listen and was now watching Sarah very carefully. Mrs. Henderson had heard Sarah practicing many times over the past 2 weeks. She had gotten used to the sound of Sarah's struggling, mistake-filled playing, but today something was different. Even though Sarah was still making mistakes, there was something about her hand position and her timing that seemed too good for someone who was learning the piece. Mrs. Henderson stepped into the room quietly. She did not want to interrupt Sarah's practice, but she wanted to observe more closely. She stood near the back of the room and watched Sarah's hands move across the keys. Sarah was trying so hard to play badly that she did not notice Mrs. Henderson watching her. She was focused on hitting wrong notes at the right moments and making her fingers look unsteady. But occasionally, for just a split second, her hands would move with perfect technique before she caught herself and made them clumsy again. Mrs. Henderson had been teaching music for 15 years. She had seen hundreds of students learn difficult pieces. She knew the difference between a student who was genuinely struggling and a student who was doing something else. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat loudly. Sarah jumped and spun around on the piano bench. Her face turned red when she saw her teacher standing there. "Oh, Mrs. Henderson." "I didn't hear you come in," Sarah said nervously. "I can see that," Mrs. Henderson said with a small smile. "How is the practice going?" Sarah looked down at her hands. It's really hard. I'm having trouble with a lot of the passages." Mrs. Henderson walked closer to the piano. "Show me the part you're working on." Sarah felt her heart beating faster. She positioned her hands on the keys and started to play the passage she had been practicing. She made sure to hit several wrong notes and to make her fingers look uncertain. Mrs. Henderson listened carefully. The music sounded rough and incomplete, but there was something about Sarah's basic technique that did not match what she was hearing. Sarah's hand position was too good. Her finger strength was too developed. Her understanding of the rhythm was too precise. "Sarah," Mrs. Henderson said gently, Can you try that passage again? But this time, don't worry about making mistakes. Just focus on playing it as smoothly as you can." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. I don't think I can play it any better than that. It's too difficult for me." Mrs. Henderson sat down on the chair next to the piano. "I've been teaching music for a long time, Sarah. I can tell when a student is really struggling with a piece. But I can also tell when something else is going on." Sarah's hands were shaking now. She did not know what to say. She had been caught, but she was not sure exactly what Mrs. Henderson had figured out. "I don't understand what you mean," Sarah said quietly. Mrs. Henderson looked at Sarah with kind eyes. "How long have you been playing piano, Sarah?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. She could either jump off and tell the truth, or she could try to climb back to safety and continue lying. I started taking lessons when I came to this school," Sarah said, but her voice sounded weak and uncertain. Mrs. Henderson shook her head gently. "No, Sarah, I don't think that's true. Your hand position is too natural. Your finger strength is too developed. You play like someone who has been studying piano for many years." Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She had been keeping this secret for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to tell the truth about her music. "I'm not trying to get you in trouble," Mrs. Henderson continued. "I'm just trying to understand what's going on." "Why? Would you pretend to struggle with a piece that you can obviously play?" Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at Mrs. Henderson and saw genuine concern and curiosity, not anger or judgment. I have been playing piano for a long time," Sarah said very quietly. "Since I was 4 years old?" Mrs. Henderson nodded. "I thought so. Where did you learn?" "In Taiwan. My grandmother taught me." Sarah's voice was getting stronger now that she was telling the truth. She was a professional pianist before she got old. Mrs. Henderson smiled. "That explains a lot. So you can actually play this Chopin piece?" Sarah nodded, feeling both relieved and terrified. "Yes, I learned it when I was 12. "Then why have you been pretending that you can't play it?" This was the question that Sarah had been dreading. She did not know how to explain her fear of being different, her desire to stay invisible, her worry about what other people would think. I didn't want anyone to know," Sarah said. "I wanted to be normal. I didn't want to stand out." Mrs. Henderson looked confused. "But Sarah, being talented at something is a good thing. Why would you want to hide your ability?" Sarah tried to find the right words. "When I came to America, everything was new and different. I didn't know how to make friends or fit in. I thought that if I was too good at something, people would think I was showing off or trying to be better than them." Mrs. Henderson was quiet for a moment. She was beginning to understand why Sarah had been hiding her talent, but she was also sad that such a gifted student had felt the need to pretend to be ordinary. "Sarah," Mrs. Henderson said gently, "talent is not something to be ashamed of. It's something to be celebrated and shared." Sarah looked at her teacher with uncertainty. "But what if people don't like me because I'm different?" Mrs. Henderson reached over and patted Sarah's shoulder. "Real friends will like you for who you are, including your talents. And if someone doesn't like you because you're good at something, then they're not the kind of person you want to be friends with anyway." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and fear. It felt good to finally tell someone the truth, but she was still worried about what would happen next. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. Mrs. Henderson smiled. "Now you show me how this piece is supposed to be played." Sarah hesitated. She had been hiding for so long that it felt strange to think about playing correctly in front of someone else. "It's okay," Mrs. Henderson said encouragingly. "I would love to hear you play it the way your grandmother taught you." Sarah took a deep breath and positioned her hands on the keys. She closed her eyes and thought about her grandmother's patient voice and gentle hands. She thought about all the hours they had spent together at the piano, learning to make beautiful music. Then Sarah began to play. This time she did not hold back. She let her fingers move exactly where they wanted to go. She let the music flow out of her hands the way it was meant to flow. She played the Chopin piece with all the skill and emotion that her grandmother had taught her. The music that filled the room was absolutely beautiful. Every note was clear and precise. Every passage flowed smoothly into the next. Sarah's hands moved across the keys with confidence and grace. Mrs. Henderson listened with amazement. This was not the playing of a high school student who was learning a difficult piece. This was the playing of someone with years of serious training and natural talent. When Sarah finished playing, the room was completely quiet. Mrs. Henderson sat in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process what she had just heard. "Sarah," Mrs. Henderson said finally, "that was extraordinary." Sarah sat quietly on the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys. She had just played the Chopin piece perfectly for Mrs. Henderson, and now she did not know what to expect. The silence in the room felt heavy and important. Mrs. Henderson was still processing what she had heard. In 15 years of teaching, she had never encountered a student who could play at this level. Sarah's performance was not just good for a high school student, it was good for anyone. "Sarah," Mrs. Henderson said slowly, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." Sarah nodded nervously. "How many years did you study piano with your grandmother?" Sarah thought about this question. "Every day after school from when I was 4 until we moved to America." "So about 10 years. Mrs. Henderson felt a chill run down her spine. 10 years of daily lessons with a professional pianist. That explained everything. Sarah was not just a talented student. She was a serious musician who had been trained at a very high level. "Did you perform in recitals or competitions in Taiwan?" Mrs. Henderson asked. Sarah nodded. "Yes, my grandmother entered me in competitions starting when I was 8. I won several awards, and I performed in concert halls a few times." Mrs. Henderson shook her head in amazement. She had assigned one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire to someone who had already mastered it years ago. She felt embarrassed about her mistake, but she was also excited about Sarah's talent. "Why didn't you tell me about your background when I assigned you this piece?" Mrs. Henderson asked. Sarah looked down at her hands. "I was afraid. I thought that if you knew I was good at piano, you would expect me to be perfect all the time. I thought other students might be jealous or think I was showing off." Mrs. Henderson understood Sarah's fear, but she also felt sad that such a gifted student had been hiding her abilities. "Sarah, talent like yours is very rare. You shouldn't hide it, you should share it with the world." Sarah felt conflicted. Part of her was relieved to finally tell the truth, but part of her was still afraid of what would happen next. What if the other students get angry when they find out I was pretending? Mrs. Henderson considered this question carefully. She understood that Sarah's situation was complicated. The other students had been feeling sorry for Sarah and criticizing Mrs. Henderson for giving her such a difficult piece. When they learned the truth, they might feel confused or even betrayed. "We'll handle that together," Mrs. Henderson said. "But first, I want to understand more about your musical background. What other pieces can you play?" Sarah thought about all the music she had learned with her grandmother. "I can play most of the Chopin etudes and nocturnes. I know several Bach inventions and some of his more difficult pieces. I've learned some Beethoven sonatas and many other classical pieces." Mrs. Henderson felt overwhelmed. Sarah had described a repertoire that would be impressive for a college music major or even a professional pianist. She realized that she had been completely wrong about Sarah's abilities. "Have you been practicing at home since you moved to America?" Mrs. Henderson asked. Sarah's face became sad. "No, we don't have a piano in our apartment. I haven't really played since we left Taiwan, except for the times I've been pretending to struggle in your music room." Mrs. Henderson felt her heart break a little bit. To have such talent and not be able to practice was like having a beautiful voice and not being allowed to sing. She understood now why Sarah had seemed reluctant to take the music class, and why she had tried to stay invisible. "Sarah, this is a tragedy," Mrs. Henderson said. "You have a gift that most people can only dream of having. You shouldn't waste it." Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes again. "But what can I do?" My family can't afford to buy a piano, and I don't have anywhere to practice. Mrs. Henderson stood up from her chair with determination. You can practice here. The music room is open every day after school until 6 o'clock. You can use any of these pianos whenever you want. Sarah looked around the room at the old upright pianos. They were not as nice as her grandmother's beautiful grand piano, but they would allow her to play music again. The thought of being able to practice every day made her feel excited and nervous at the same time. But what about the other students? Sarah asked. What if they hear me playing and realize I was lying to them? Mrs. Henderson sat back down and looked at Sarah seriously. Sarah, I think you need to tell them the truth. They've been worried about you for weeks. They've been angry at me for giving you such a difficult assignment. Don't you think they deserve to know what's really going on? Sarah felt scared at the thought of revealing her secret to her classmates. She had worked so hard to stay invisible and fit in. If she told them the truth, everything would change. What if they don't like me anymore? Sarah asked quietly. Mrs. Henderson smiled gently. Sarah, I've been watching your classmates for the past 2 weeks. They've been nothing but supportive and kind to you. Maya has been eating lunch with you every day to keep you company. Jessica and Amanda have offered to help you practice. Even Marcus, who complains about everything, has been defending you. Sarah thought about this. It was true that her classmates had been very kind to her. They had been worried about her and angry on her behalf. But she was still afraid that they would feel betrayed when they learned she had been lying. I don't know how to tell them, Sarah said. Mrs. Henderson thought for a moment. What if we do it together? I could call a special class meeting and explain that there's been a misunderstanding about your assignment. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. You mean tell everyone at once? It might be easier than telling people one by one, Mrs. Henderson said. And it would give you a chance to explain why you felt like you had to hide your talent. Sarah was quiet for several minutes. She was trying to imagine what it would be like to stand in front of her music class and admit that she had been pretending to struggle with the piano piece. She was trying to imagine their reactions when they learned the truth. Could I play something for them? Sarah asked hesitantly. So they could hear what I can really do? Mrs. Henderson's face lit up. That's a wonderful idea. You could play the Chopin piece the way it's supposed to be played. Or you could play something else that you love. Sarah thought about her grandmother's favorite piece. It was a beautiful Chopin nocturne that her grandmother had taught her when she was 10 years old. Every time Sarah played it, she felt close to her grandmother's memory. There's a piece that my grandmother loved, Sarah said. It's not as technically difficult as the etude, but it's very beautiful. Maybe I could play that. Mrs. Henderson nodded encouragingly. I think that would be perfect. Music is about emotion and beauty, not just technical skill. Sarah was starting to feel a little bit excited about the idea of playing for her classmates. She had missed performing for people. She had missed sharing beautiful music with others. Maybe Mrs. Henderson was right. Maybe her talent was something to be celebrated instead of hidden. When would we do this? Sarah asked. Mrs. Henderson looked at her calendar. Tomorrow is Friday. We could have the class meeting then, and you could perform on Monday during our regular class time. That would give you the weekend to practice and prepare. Sarah felt her stomach flutter with nervousness. 3 days from now, she would reveal her secret to everyone. 3 days from now, her life at school would completely change. What if I mess up when I'm playing for them? Sarah asked. Mrs. Henderson smiled. Sarah, after what I just heard, I don't think you need to worry about messing up. But even if you make a mistake, it won't matter. What matters is that you're being honest about who you are. Sarah took a deep breath. She thought about her grandmother and all the lessons they had shared together. She thought about the joy of making beautiful music and the satisfaction of playing a piece perfectly. She thought about how tired she was of pretending to be someone she wasn't. Okay, Sarah said quietly, let's do it. Mrs. Henderson reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand. I'm proud of you for being brave enough to share your gift. Your grandmother would be proud of you too. Sarah felt a warm feeling in her chest. For the first time since moving to America, she felt like maybe it was okay to be different. Maybe it was okay to be talented. Maybe it was okay to let people see who she really was. But Sarah was also nervous about what the next few days would bring. She was nervous about how her classmates would react. She was nervous about performing in front of people again after so long. She was nervous about everything changing. Sarah did not know that her decision to tell the truth would lead to the most important performance of her life. She did not know that her classmates would surprise her with their reactions. She did not know that hiding her talent had been much harder than sharing it would be. Friday morning came faster than Sarah had expected. She woke up feeling nervous and excited at the same time. Today, Mrs. Henderson would tell the class about Sarah's musical background. Tomorrow, Sarah would have to perform for everyone and show them who she really was. Sarah got dressed slowly and ate breakfast with her family. Her parents noticed that she seemed different today, but they could not figure out what had changed. Sarah seemed nervous but also more alert and awake than she had been in weeks. "Are you feeling okay?" Sarah's mother asked. "You seem worried about something." Sarah nodded and finished her toast. "I'm fine. Just thinking about a school project." Sarah's father looked at her carefully. "If there's anything bothering you at school, you can always talk to us about it." Sarah felt guilty for not telling her parents about the recital and everything that was happening, but she wanted to get through the next few days before she explained everything to them. When Sarah arrived at school, she felt like everyone was looking at her differently. Of course, this was not true. Nobody knew about her conversation with Mrs. Henderson yesterday. But Sarah felt like her secret was written on her face for everyone to see. Sarah's first 3 classes passed slowly. She could not concentrate on anything her teachers were saying. She kept thinking about what would happen during music class. She kept imagining how her classmates would react when they learned the truth. Finally, it was time for music class. Sarah walked into the room and sat in her usual seat in the back corner. Mayo came and sat next to her, just like she had been doing for the past 2 weeks. "How's the piano piece going?" Maya asked. "Are you feeling any better about it?" Sarah felt her heart speed up. "Actually, something has changed." Maya looked interested. "Really? Did you figure out one of the difficult parts?" Before Sarah could answer, Mrs. Henderson called the class to attention. "Good morning, everyone. Before we start our regular lesson today, I need to talk to you about something important." The students looked curious. Mrs. Henderson seemed excited about something, which was unusual for her. "A few weeks ago, I assigned solo pieces for the spring recital," Mrs. Henderson continued. "I know that some of you have been concerned about Sarah's assignment." Sarah felt her face turn red as everyone turned to look at her. Maya reached over and squeezed her hand supportively. "I assigned Sarah a very difficult Chopin piece," Mrs. Henderson said. "Many of you thought this was unfair, and you were worried that Sarah would struggle with it." Jessica raised her hand. "Mrs. Henderson, we weren't trying to complain about you. We were just worried about Sarah. That piece is really hard." Mrs. Henderson smiled. "I know you were all being supportive of Sarah, and that shows what good friends you are. But I need to explain something that will probably surprise all of you." The room became very quiet. Everyone was listening carefully to see what Mrs. Henderson would say next. "Yesterday I had a conversation with Sarah about her musical background," Mrs. Henderson continued. "I discovered something that I should have known earlier. Sarah has been studying piano since she was 4 years old." The students looked confused. They turned to stare at Sarah, who was looking down at her desk. Marcus raised his hand. "But Mrs. Henderson, we've all heard Sarah practicing." "She's having a really hard time with that piece," Mrs. Henderson nodded. "That's what I thought too. But it turns out that Sarah has been... Well, let me let her explain it to you herself." Mrs. Henderson looked at Sarah encouragingly. "Sarah, would you like to tell your classmates about your piano training?" Sarah felt like her heart was beating so loudly that everyone could hear it. She looked around the room at all the faces staring at her. These were students who had been kind to her and worried about her for weeks. Now she had to tell them that she had been lying to them. Sarah stood up slowly. Her legs felt shaky, but she knew she had to do this. I haven't been honest with you, Sarah said quietly. I've been playing piano since I was 4 years old. My grandmother in Taiwan taught me. She was a professional pianist. The room was completely silent. Sarah could see confusion and surprise on her classmates' faces. I can actually play the Chopin piece that Mrs. Henderson assigned me, Sarah continued. I learned it when I was 12 years old. Jessica's mouth fell open. What? But we heard you practicing? You were having so much trouble with it? Sarah felt her face burning with embarrassment. I was pretending to have trouble. I was playing badly on purpose. Amanda stared at Sarah in shock. Why would you do that? Sarah had known this question was coming, but she still did not know how to answer it. How could she explain her fear of being different? How could she explain her desire to stay invisible? I was scared, Sarah said honestly. When my family moved to America, everything was new and different. I didn't know how to make friends or fit in. I thought that if people knew I was good at piano, they would think I was trying to show off. Maya looked hurt and confused. But Sarah, we've been worried about you for weeks. We thought Mrs. Henderson was being unfair to you. Sarah felt terrible. She had not thought about how her deception would affect her friends. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you worry. I just I just wanted to be normal. Marcus leaned back in his chair and shook his head. This is crazy. So you can actually play that impossible piece? Sarah nodded. Yes, the room erupted in whispers and excited conversations. Students were talking to each other and trying to process what they had just learned. Mrs. Henderson held up her hand to quiet the class. I know this is surprising news, but I want you all to understand that Sarah was not trying to hurt anyone. She was just afraid of being different. Jessica turned to Sarah with a mixture of amazement and confusion. Sarah, how good are you at piano? Like really good? Sarah did not know how to answer this question. She had never had to describe her own abilities before. Mrs. Henderson answered for her. Sarah is extremely talented. She has years of professional training and she has performed in competitions and concerts. Amanda stared at Sarah like she was seeing her for the first time. I can't believe this. You've been sitting in the back of this class for 2 years and we had no idea. Sarah felt overwhelmed by all the attention. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. Everyone was staring at her and asking her questions. She was no longer invisible, but then something unexpected happened. Maya smiled at Sarah and said, "This is amazing. Sarah, you're like a secret piano genius." Other students started to smile too. Instead of being angry about Sarah's deception, they seemed excited about her talent. Can you play something for us right now? Asked a girl named Lisa. Yeah, we want to hear you play for real, said Marcus. Sarah looked at Mrs. Henderson, who nodded encouragingly. Would you like to play something for your classmates, Sarah? Sarah felt nervous, but she also felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt proud of her musical abilities. She felt ready to share her talent with her friends. Sarah walked to the piano at the front of the room. She sat down on the bench and positioned her hands on the keys. The room was completely quiet as everyone waited to hear her play. Sarah decided to play a short piece that her grandmother had loved. It was a beautiful Chopin nocturne that was not too long or too complicated, but it would show her classmates what she could really do. Sarah began to play. And immediately the room filled with the most beautiful music any of the students had ever heard in person. Sarah's fingers moved gracefully across the keys and every note was perfect and clear. The melody was so beautiful that some students felt tears in their eyes. When Sarah finished playing, the room was silent for a moment. Then suddenly everyone started clapping and cheering. Sarah, that was incredible, Jessica shouted. I can't believe how amazing that was, said Amanda. Marcus was shaking his head in amazement. I had no idea anyone our age could play like that. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the positive response. She had been so afraid that her classmates would be angry or jealous, but instead they seemed genuinely excited and happy for her. Maya came up to the piano with tears in her eyes. Sarah, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Why were you afraid to show us this? Sarah looked around the room at all the smiling faces. Her classmates were not angry or jealous. They were not treating her differently in a bad way. They were treating her like she was special and talented, which felt wonderful. I guess I was afraid for no reason, Sarah said quietly. Mrs. Henderson smiled at Sarah with pride. Sometimes our fears are bigger than the reality. Sarah, your classmates are happy to know the real you. Sarah felt a warm feeling spreading through her chest. For the first time since moving to America, she felt like she belonged somewhere. She felt like she could be herself without being afraid, but Sarah also realized that everything had changed now. She was no longer the quiet, invisible girl in the back of the room. She was Sarah Chun, the talented pianist. She was not sure what that would mean for her life, but she was starting to think it might be a good thing. Over the weekend, Sarah's life completely changed. Word about her piano skills spread quickly through the school. Students who had never talked to her before came up to her in the hallways to ask about her music. Teachers who barely knew her. Names suddenly wanted to hear about her background and training. Sarah felt overwhelmed by all the attention, but it was different from what she had expected. People were not treating her like she was strange or showing off. They were treating her like she was special and interesting. For the first time in her life, being different felt like a good thing. On Saturday morning, Sarah decided to tell her family about everything that had happened. She had been keeping the secret about the recital and her conversation with Mrs. Henderson for too long. Sarah's family was eating breakfast together when she made her announcement. Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something important about school. Her parents looked up from their food with concern. They had been worried about Sarah for weeks because she seemed stressed and unhappy. What's wrong? Her mother asked. Are you having problems with your teachers? Sarah shook her head. No, it's not a problem. It's actually good news. But it's complicated. Sarah's father put down his coffee cup. What kind of good news? Sarah took a deep breath and explained everything. She told them about the music class and the recital assignment. She told them about her decision to hide her piano skills and pretend to struggle with the difficult piece. She told them about her conversation with Mrs. Henderson and the class. Meeting on Friday, Sarah's parents listened to the whole story with amazement and confusion. They had no idea that Sarah had been taking a music class or that she had been assigned to perform in a recital. Sarah, her mother said when she finished talking, why didn't you tell us about this earlier? We had no idea you were so stressed about hiding your piano skills. Sarah felt guilty for keeping so many secrets from her family. I didn't want you to worry about me, and I wasn't sure what to do about the situation. Sarah's father looked proud and sad at the same time. Sarah, we brought you to America so you could have more opportunities, not so you could hide your talents. You should never be ashamed of the skills that your grandmother taught you. David, Sarah's younger brother, was staring at her with excitement. So you're like really good at piano? Like professional good? Sarah nodded. I guess so. I haven't played seriously for 3 years, but Mrs. Henderson says I'm very skilled. David grinned. That's so cool. I had no idea my sister was a secret piano genius. Sarah's mother reached over and took her hand. We want to come to your recital. We want to see you perform and show everyone how talented you are. Sarah felt nervous about her family coming to the recital, but also excited. She had missed performing for people who loved her. The recital is in 6 weeks. Mrs. Henderson says I can play whatever piece I want. Sarah's father smiled. What piece do you think you'll choose? Sarah had been thinking about this question all weekend. She could play the difficult Chopin etude that Mrs. Henderson had originally assigned her. She could play one of her grandmother's favorite pieces. Or she could choose something completely new. I think I want to play something that my grandmother taught me, Sarah said. Something that reminds me of our lessons together and how much music meant to both of us. Sarah's mother wiped away a tear. Your grandmother would be so proud of you for being brave enough to share your gift. On Monday morning, Sarah walked into school feeling nervous but excited. Today was the day she would perform for her music class and show everyone what she could really do. She had spent the weekend practicing on an old keyboard that her family had found in their storage closet. It was not the same as playing on a real piano, but it had helped her prepare. Sarah arrived at the music room early and sat at one of the pianos. She played through the piece she had chosen one more time to make sure she was ready. It was a beautiful Chopin nocturne that her grandmother had loved. It was not the most technically difficult piece Sarah could play, but it was the most emotionally meaningful. As other students started to arrive for class, they gathered around the piano to listen to Sarah practice. Instead of feeling nervous about the attention, Sarah felt supported and encouraged. "That sounds amazing," Maya said. "I can't wait to hear you play it for real. I still can't believe we had no idea you were so talented," Jessica added. "You've been hiding this incredible skill for 2 years." Mrs. Henderson called the class to attention. "Today, Sarah is going to perform for us. This will give you all a chance to hear what professional-level piano playing sounds like." Sarah felt her heart beating faster, but it was excitement rather than fear. She walked to the piano at the front of the room and sat down on the bench. She looked out at her classmates, who were all watching her with anticipation and support. Sarah thought about her grandmother for a moment. She imagined the old woman sitting in the audience, ready to hear her granddaughter play. She thought about all the lessons they had shared together and all the love that had gone into her musical training. Sarah began to play. The first notes of the nocturne filled the room with gentle, beautiful sound. Sarah's fingers moved across the keys with perfect control and grace. Every phrase was shaped with care and emotion. The melody sang out clearly, telling a story without words. As Sarah played, she felt all her fears and worries disappear. She remembered why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. She remembered the joy of creating something beautiful and sharing it with other people. She remembered her grandmother's proud smile. When she played a piece perfectly, the music seemed to transport everyone in the room to another place. Sarah's classmates sat in complete silence, amazed by what they were hearing. They had never experienced live music at this level before. Some of them had tears in their eyes from the beauty of Sarah's playing. Mrs. Henderson watched with pride and amazement. In 15 years of teaching, she had never had a student who could play with such skill and emotion. She realized that Sarah was not just talented, she was truly gifted. When Sarah reached the end of the piece, she held the final note until it faded completely away. The room was silent for a moment, and then everyone burst into applause. Her classmates were cheering and clapping with genuine enthusiasm. "Sarah, that was absolutely beautiful," Jessica said with tears in her eyes. "I have never heard anything so amazing in my whole life," Marcus added, and he seemed completely sincere. Amanda stood up and started clapping louder. "That was like listening to a professional concert." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the positive response. She had been so afraid that revealing her talent would make her classmates treat her differently in a bad way. Instead, they were treating her with respect and admiration. Mrs. Henderson came over to the piano and put her hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Sarah, that was extraordinary. You have a true gift, and I'm so glad you decided to share it with us." Sarah looked around the room at all the smiling faces. For the first time since moving to America, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. She felt like she could be herself completely, including the parts of herself that made her different and special. "Thank you for listening," Sarah said quietly. "And thank you for being so supportive when I told you the truth about my background." Mia came up to the piano. "Sarah, I'm so glad you trust us enough to show us who you really are. This is who you've been all along. We just didn't know it." Sarah felt a warm feeling spreading through her chest. She realized that her grandmother had been right about music being a language that everyone could understand. Through her playing, she had been able to communicate with her classmates in a way that words never could have accomplished. After class, several students stayed behind to talk to Sarah about her music. They asked her about her training and her experiences performing in Taiwan. They wanted to know what other pieces she could play and whether she planned to continue studying piano. Sarah answered all their questions with growing confidence. She was no longer afraid to talk about her musical background. She was no longer afraid to be different or special. Mrs. Henderson also stayed after class to talk to Sarah. I want to discuss your plans for the spring recital. After hearing you play today, I think you should consider performing something more challenging than what the other students will be playing. Sarah thought about this suggestion. What do you mean? Mrs. Henderson smiled. I mean that you could play a piece that really shows off your abilities. You could play something that demonstrates your years of training and your natural talent. Sarah felt excited about this possibility. Like what? Mrs. Henderson thought for a moment. You mentioned that you know the Chopin etude that I originally assigned you. Why don't you play that for the recital? It would be a way to show everyone what you're truly capable of. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. I would love to play that piece. It would be like completing the circle of everything that has happened, Mrs. Henderson agreed. And Sarah, I want to make sure you have plenty of time to practice. You can use this piano room whenever you want. Consider it your personal practice space. Sarah felt tears of gratitude in her eyes. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. Thank you for helping me find the courage to be myself. The night of the spring recital arrived 6 weeks later. Sarah stood backstage in the school auditorium, wearing a simple black dress and her grandmother's jade bracelet. She could hear the audience talking and laughing as they found their seats. Tonight she would perform the Chopin Etude Op. 10 No. 4 for everyone who had supported her journey. Sarah's family had arrived early and was sitting in the front row. Her parents looked proud and excited. While David kept turning around to wave at his friends, Mrs. Henderson had told them that Sarah would be performing last, in the place of honor that was usually reserved for the most advanced student. The past 6 weeks had been the happiest time Sarah had experienced since moving to America. She had practiced every day after school in the music room, rediscovering her love for piano and improving her skills. Her classmates often came to listen to her practice, and she had even started giving informal lessons to some of the younger students. Sarah was no longer the quiet, invisible girl who hid in the back corner. She had joined the school's music club and was helping to plan next year's recital. Teachers and students throughout the school knew her as the talented pianist, and she felt proud of her reputation instead of afraid of it, but tonight was different. Tonight, Sarah would perform for the largest audience she had faced since moving to America. There would be families, friends, teachers, and students from throughout the school. Sarah felt nervous, but it was the good kind of nervousness that came with anticipation and excitement. Mrs. Henderson appeared backstage wearing a formal dress and a big smile. How are you feeling, Sarah? Sarah took a deep breath. Nervous, but ready. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. Mrs. Henderson nodded. You've prepared beautifully. Just remember to enjoy yourself out there. This is your chance to share your gift with everyone. The recital began with Jessica singing a beautiful classical song. She was followed by Marcus playing guitar, Amanda playing violin, and several other students performing their pieces. Each performance was good, and the audience clapped politely after every song. Sarah watched from backstage and felt proud of her classmates. They had all worked hard to prepare for tonight, and they were doing their best. But Sarah also knew that her performance would be very different from what the audience had heard so far. Finally, Mrs. Henderson walked onto the stage to introduce the final performance. Ladies and gentlemen, our last performer tonight is someone very special. Sarah Chun has been studying piano since she was 4 years old, and she learned from her grandmother, who was a professional pianist in Taiwan. Tonight, Sarah will be playing one of the most challenging pieces in the classical piano repertoire, Chopin's Etude, Op. 10 No. 4 in C-sharp minor. The audience murmured with interest and anticipation. Most of them had never heard of this piece, but they could tell from Mrs. Henderson's introduction that it was something impressive. Sarah walked onto the stage feeling calm and confident. She had worn her grandmother's jade bracelet for luck, and she could feel the old woman's presence with her. The stage lights were bright, But Sarah could see her family in the front row and her classmates scattered throughout the audience. Sarah sat down at the grand piano that had been brought in especially for the recital. It was much nicer than the old upright pianos in the music room, and Sarah felt excited to play on such a beautiful instrument. Before she began playing, Sarah closed her eyes for a moment and thought about her journey. She thought about the scared, lonely girl who had arrived at Westfield High School 3 years ago. She thought about her decision to hide her talent and her fear of being different. She thought about Mrs. Henderson's kindness and her classmates' support. She thought about her grandmother's love and all the lessons they had shared together. When Sarah opened her eyes, she felt ready. She positioned her hands on the keys and began to play. The first notes of the Chopin Etude filled the auditorium with crystalline clarity. Sarah's fingers moved across the keys with incredible speed and precision. The difficult passages that had challenged pianists for generations flowed effortlessly from her hands. The audience immediately recognized that they were hearing something extraordinary. This was not a typical high school recital performance. This was the playing of a serious musician with years of professional training. Sarah's technique was flawless, but more importantly, her playing was filled with emotion and artistry. She was not just playing the notes correctly, she was telling a story through the music. Every phrase was shaped with care and meaning. Every dynamic change painted a different color in the musical landscape. As Sarah played, she felt transported back to her grandmother's living room in Taiwan. She could almost hear the old woman's encouraging voice and feel her gentle presence beside the piano bench. This performance was Sarah's gift to her grandmother's memory and her way of honoring everything she had been taught. The audience sat in complete silence, mesmerized by what they were hearing. Parents who had come expecting a typical school recital found themselves witnessing a performance that belonged in a professional concert hall. Students who thought they knew Sarah realized they had been friends with someone truly extraordinary. Sarah's family watched with tears streaming down their faces. They had known about Sarah's talent, but they had not heard her play seriously for 3 years. Seeing their daughter perform with such skill and confidence reminded them of why they had worked so hard to give her opportunities in America. Mrs. Henderson stood at the side of the stage with her hand over her heart. In 15 years of teaching, she had never been prouder of a student. Watching Sarah play reminded her of why she had become a music teacher in the first place. As the piece built to its climactic ending, Sarah's playing became even more powerful and expressive. Her fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed, but every note remained clear and controlled. The music filled every corner of the auditorium with breathtaking intensity. When Sarah played the final notes and lifted her hands from the keys, the auditorium was completely silent for several seconds. The audience seemed stunned by what they had just witnessed. Then suddenly, the silence exploded into the most enthusiastic applause Sarah had ever heard. People jumped to their feet, clapping and cheering with genuine amazement. Sarah's classmates were whistling and shouting her name. Her parents were crying with pride and joy. Even the other parents in the audience, who barely knew Sarah, were applauding with tears in their eyes. Sarah stood up from the piano bench and took a bow. She looked out at the standing ovation and felt overwhelmed with happiness. This was what her grandmother had always told her music could accomplish. It could bring people together and create moments of pure beauty and joy. Mrs. Henderson walked onto the stage and gave Sarah a big hug. "That was absolutely magnificent," she whispered in Sarah's ear. "Your grandmother would be so proud." Sarah felt the jade bracelet warm against her wrist, and she knew that her grandmother was indeed proud. She had finally found the courage to share her gift with the world, and the world had welcomed her with open arms. As the applause continued, Sarah's family came onto the stage to congratulate her. Her mother hugged her tightly and said, "We are so proud of you for being brave enough to show everyone who you really are." Sarah's father shook his head in amazement. "I had forgotten how beautiful your playing could be. Thank you for reminding us of your gift." David grinned at his sister. "That was the coolest thing I've ever seen. Everyone at school is going to know that my sister is a piano genius." Sarah's classmates also crowded onto the stage to congratulate her. Maya was crying with happiness. Sarah, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life. I'm so glad you decided to trust us with your secret. Jessica hugged Sarah enthusiastically. I can't believe I was worried about you struggling with that piece. You're incredible. Even Marcus, who usually acted too cool to be impressed by anything, came up to Sarah with genuine respect. That was amazing. I had no idea anyone could play piano like that. Amanda was shaking her head in wonder. Sarah, you're not just good at piano, you're a real artist. That wasn't just playing music, that was creating magic. As the crowd in the auditorium began to thin out, Mrs. Henderson pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. Sarah, I need to talk to you about your future. You have too much talent to waste. Sarah looked at her teacher with curiosity. What do you mean, Mrs. Henderson smiled? I mean that you should be studying with a professional piano teacher. You should be preparing for competitions and auditions. You should be thinking about music school and a career as a professional pianist. Sarah felt excited but also overwhelmed by these suggestions. I don't know if my family can afford private lessons or music school. Mrs. Henderson shook her head. Sarah, with your level of talent, there are scholarships and opportunities available. I'm going to help you research programs and find the best path forward for your musical education. Sarah felt tears of gratitude in her eyes. You would do that for me? Mrs. Henderson smiled warmly. Sarah, it's not often that a teacher encounters a student with your level of gift. It would be my honor to help you develop your potential.